Now that we have created so many users, defined roles and different types of permissions, there might be a situation in real time where application team might ask you that, hey, can you tell me what all permissions are assigned to so and so user? Or can you tell me what role is assigned to a user? In such case, you need to have some queries. Here we have some of the queries which will help you in real time to identify how to figure out the permissions assigned to a user, or how to figure out the object level permissions, system level permission, what are the roles assigned to a user, and what are the permissions that are granted to a role. Very typical, but yes, they do help you in real time to answer the application team. The first query that we have is how to check system privileges for a user. Let's take some of the system level privileges are given to a user, like you assign create role, create synonym, and other types of system level privileges to a user. Then we can query this from DBA-sysprivs. We have this column privilege, select privilege from DBA-sysprivs, where grant is nothing but the user to which the permissions are granted. We want to check if there are any system level privileges granted to the Scott user. Let us run the command select privilege from DBA-sysprivs, and we can see that unlimited table space privilege is granted to the Scott user. If you remember, there is a role called as resource. Like when we created the John user, we have granted connect comma resource to John. The resource role will always grant unlimited privilege on the table space, and that's why the resource role should not be assigned to any user that you create in real time. As I said earlier, in real time you will be specified by the application team like what all roles are to be granted to users and all. Eventually, in your practice, you can grant connect comma resource. Connect is something you have to grant, otherwise user won't be able to connect to the database, but don't grant resource in real time. If you grant resource, the user will have unlimited table space quota. The next query that we have is how to check object level privileges. For example, you want to check what are all the privileges that a user or a role has on a particular table. In our last lesson, we have given some permission to the role sales clerk, right? Let us check what all permission sales clerk is having on different tables inside the database. Let us query this one. We can see that sales clerk is having delete permission on the bonus table, which is owned by the Scott user. Sales clerk is having insert permission on the department table owned by the Scott user, and select and update privileges on employee table, which is again owned by the Scott user. With this way, you can figure out what are all privileges a user or a role is having on a particular tables. Remember, you can even query this by restricting the where clause to the owner name or on a table name as well. Over here, what we did is we tried to check the privileges given to the role sales clerk. The next query that we have is like how to check roles assigned to a user. Like how we have assigned sales clerk to John, same way we can check with this query like what roles are assigned to the user John. J-O-H-N, John. We can clearly see that connect comma resources are the first roles that we had assigned after creating the user John. And we see that sales clerk is also assigned to the user John. This command will help you figure out like what our roles are assigned to a user, and in real time also you can define those roles. Most of the times application team will come to you like asking, can you tell me what role is assigned to a user? At that point of time, this query will help you out in finding what are roles assigned to a user. Next, how to check permissions assigned to a role. We know that we have assigned some permissions to the sales clerk role, correct? How do we check those permissions? First query that we have is select privilege from role sys privs. which means what are the system level privileges given to a role where role name is sales clerk. Let us query this command. We can see that there are no system level privileges granted to the sales clerk role. Next, select owner table privilege from role tab privs. Initially, if you see, we were querying DBA tab privs, but over here we are querying role tab privs. That means what are the privileges given to a role on a table where role name is sales clerk. So we can query this one. Ultimately, if you see, both the queries will give us the same results. Owner is Scott, table name, and the privileges. If you see, both the output of the query is exactly same. The next one is like role privileges. In real time, it might happen that you can assign 2-3 roles to another role, and then you assign the main role to a user. For example, let's take there is sales clerk, and also we have billing operator. These are the two roles. These two roles will have their own set of permissions, like sales clerk will have different permissions and billing operator will have different permissions. Imagine your own sales clerk is now promoted to a manager. What you can do is you can create a new role called as store manager, and then you actually grant sales clerk, billing operator to store manager, and then you grant store manager to John. With this way, if you see closely, we had two basic roles and then we created a manager role. We granted these two roles to the manager, and then the manager role is granted to a physical user. The same way inside database, you want to check what are the roles that are assigned to other roles inside the database. In such situations, you will query role privs view. Now let us query this one. We are trying to check what are the other roles that are assigned to the sales clerk. We see no roles are assigned to this role, sales clerk. This way, these are the few queries which will help you in real time in order to work with the users, their privileges, what are roles, what are the different roles inside the database, roles assigned to a user, and whatnot. In your practice, I would request you guys to create multiple users, give some permissions to the users, create some real-time roles, assign roles to the users, and then you work with these queries to figure out what are roles and permissions are assigned to a user.